close your eyes. There's no need to rush. Just close them and let the room grow a little darker. If you have a light on, turn it off. If there's still a glow from another screen, let it fade. It doesn't have to be pitch black, just dark enough for the outside world to step back. Now breathe in slowly. Hold it for a moment. Then let it out long and deep. Good. Let your breathing slow. Let the noise in your head settle. Let the weight of a long day slip behind you. I'm going to tell you a story you think you already know. A story about a girl, a pair of shoes, and a prince. A story about magic, about midnight, and about something people like to call happily ever after. You know the story, don't you? You've known it since you were very young. You know the fairy godmother, the pumpkin carriage, the mice turned into horses. You know the glittering slipper left behind on the palace steps, and the prince who searches the kingdom to find the girl it belongs to. You know the safe ending, the swelling music, the softened light, the promise that everything turns out exactly as it should. It's a comforting story, a bedtime story, the kind that whispers that if you're good enough, patient enough, quiet enough, then someday something wonderful will come for you. But you're not a child anymore, are you? And this isn't that story. This isn't the version made for children, not the one that's been polished, smooth, softened, cleaned up until it's easy to swallow and easy to forget. This is the story from before people decided darkness was something that needed to be hidden, an older version, a rougher one, and a far more honest one. In this story, there is blood. There are screams. Some promises don't disappear just because the person who made them is dead. Some birds remember everything others try to forget. And this story doesn't end neatly. It doesn't fade out with a kiss and a black screen. It ends with things that will follow you into your sleep, and if you're not careful, they'll sit there waiting for you in the dark. So if you're looking for something gentle, something reassuring, something that tells you justice is always clean and cruelty is punished, just enough this might be the moment to turn back. But if you stay, if you're old enough to hear a story that doesn't flinch from the truth, then stay with me. And if you find yourself drawn to stories told like this, slowly, late at night, without rushing to comfort, you can subscribe to the channel now, just a small click. Turn on notifications if you want, so the next time the night settles and everything goes quiet, another story will be waiting for you. For now, stay. Listen all the way through, because the story I'm about to tell isn't meant to be heard and forgotten. It will follow you into your sleep, and it may stay with you longer than you expect. If you're ready, we'll begin. And remember, this story doesn't start with magic. It begins with a death. Death does not arrive suddenly. It does not knock. It does not announce itself. It does not come with thunder or lightning. It comes slowly, so slowly, like a winter that lingers too long, like darkness slipping inch by inch through a crack in the door until the room is cold before anyone realizes it. Aschenputtel's mother began to weaken late that autumn. At first it was just a weariness with no clear cause. She would sit down in the middle of her work, one hand resting against her chest, her breathing slowing as if the air in the room had grown heavier than usual. People said it was age, the weather, the ordinary exhaustion of a woman who had borne children and worked too hard for too long. She said the same thing herself, smiling to reassure her daughter, saying that a few days of rest would set everything right. But days passed, then weeks, and the weariness did not leave. It stayed. It clung to her like a shadow. Her body began to change in ways Aschenputtel was too young to fully understand, but old enough to fear. Her mother's hands, once warm and steady, grew colder. Her fingers thinned, bone showing beneath skin that had become almost translucent. Her face hollowed, as if something inside her was being quietly drawn away. Her eyes, once bright and gentle, seemed too large now for her face, holding a deep exhaustion, as if she were already looking at a place no one else in the house could see yet. Aschenputtel remembers the smell of the room, boiled herbs, old cloth, and something else she never found a name for, a dry, faint scent that felt empty. Her mother stayed in bed more and more. The tasks she once did without thought became impossible. Even sitting up made her stop, close her eyes, and take shallow breaths. Aschenputtel's father moved restlessly through the house, but he did not stay. There was always something to attend to, some journey to prepare for. He believed, or wanted to believe, that illness would pass, that things would return to normal. Aschenputtel learned early that adults have a strange way of refusing to look directly at what frightens them, but Aschenputtel saw everything. She saw her mother grow thinner each day. She saw bowls of soup go cold on the table untouched. She saw the nights when her mother could not sleep, staring at the ceiling in the dark, her breathing shallow and uneven. Aschenputtel sat beside the bed, holding her mother's hand, talking about small things, the chickens in the yard, the apple tree behind the house. Anything that was not what both of them knew was drawing closer. The illness had no name. People called it the wasting, something accepted in those days as part of life. The body is consuming itself slowly and without mercy. There was no medicine, no cure, only waiting. Winter came, and Aschenputtel's mother no longer left the bed. Snow gathered thick on the roof. Wind crept through the cracks in the walls. Inside the small room, time seemed to slow. Each day looked almost exactly like the one before, as if the world had paused to wait for a single thing to be finished. Aschenputtel began sleeping on the floor beside the bed. She was afraid that if she slept too deeply, her mother would disappear without her knowing. Sometimes in the night, her mother opened her eyes and looked at her with a gaze that was both tender and unbearably sad. She stroked Aschenputtel's hair with a touch so light it was barely there, whispering comforts she herself was no longer sure she believed. Then came an early spring morning when the snow outside had begun to melt into dirty gray patches. Her mother called Aschenputtel closer. Her voice was so weak that each word seemed to be pulled up from deep inside her chest. Aschenputtel knelt by the bed, gripping her mother's hand, feeling how the cold had reached even her fingertips. "My child," her mother whispered, "live well. Keep your heart pure. God will protect you." These were the words people expect in moments like this. Familiar words, safe words. Aschenputtel nodded, her tears falling onto her mother's hand, hot against the cold skin. But her mother did not stop. She drew a long breath, gathering what little strength remained, and spoke again slower, now more serious. "When I die," she said, "plant a hazel branch on my grave." Aschenputtel looked up confused. "Water it with your tears," her mother continued. "And when you need me, go there. Call me. I will hear you." This was not comfort. It was a promise. A strange promise, one that did not belong to the world of the living. Aschenputtel did not fully understand it, but she felt the weight of it, as if her mother were speaking of something real and certain, something that reached beyond the death now so close. Then her mother closed her eyes. There was no dramatic sigh, no final movement. Her breathing simply grew farther apart and then stopped. The silence in the room thickened, as if the air itself had frozen. Aschenputtel sat there for a long time, holding her mother's hand, waiting for another breath, a flicker, any sign that this was not the end. Nothing came. The room remained silent. Her mother was gone. The funeral was small and quiet. A few neighbors, a priest murmuring words in a language Aschenputtel did not understand. The coffin was lowered into cold earth, shovelful after shovelful of dirt falling with a dry final sound. Aschenputtel stood there, feeling as though part of her had been buried with it. When everyone had left, she returned alone. She carried a thin, fragile hazel branch. She planted it on her mother's grave, her hands trembling, dirt packed beneath her fingernails. She knelt and cried not loudly, but with a deep, silent grief that had no end. Her tears soaked into the soil around the young roots. And in that moment, in the cold spring wind and the smell of damp earth, Aschenputtel whispered. She did not know to whom. She did not know if anyone could hear, but she whispered, as if the promise were real. "I'll come back," she said, "when I need you." The hazel tree stood there silent, But some promises spoken at the right moment are never forgotten, and that death, slow and unrelenting, became the first wound, the deepest one, the wound that would open the way for everything that came after. After her mother's death, the house did not collapse right away. It did not fall into ruin. It did not burn. It did not turn into a place that was obviously dangerous. It still stood there with the same familiar walls, the same old doors, the same rooms Aschenputtel had grown up in. But something had vanished and nothing could replace it, the presence of the one person who had ever truly seen her. The first days after the funeral passed in a very particular kind of silence, not a peaceful silence, but a tense one, as if the entire house were holding its breath. Her father moved through the rooms more often, sorting papers, speaking with neighbors, receiving condolences. He did everything a man in his position was expected to do. There was only one thing he did not do. He did not stay. Aschenputtel saw this clearly. He was in the house, but he was not truly there. His eyes passed over her, paused for a moment, too short to mean anything, then slid away. He did not ask if she slept well, if she was afraid, or if she missed her mother. Perhaps he believed that if he did not ask, the answers would not exist. Perhaps he believed time would do the hard work for him. Time, of course, did no such thing. Spring passed. Summer came. And while Aschenputtel still laid her hand against the hazel tree, whenever she went to the graveyard, her father began speaking of the future. Not her future, but the future of the house. A house needed order. A family needed a woman. A man could not manage everything on his own forever. He spoke calmly, reasonably, as if explaining a simple calculation, and Aschenputtel, standing in the doorway, listened, as a familiar cold spread through her chest. She did not argue. She did not know how. She had already learned that adults rarely ask children what they think once a decision has been made. The new woman entered the house on a mild afternoon. She wore black proper and restrained her smile just sad enough to suggest she had known loss herself. She bowed her head before the portrait of the first wife and spoke polite words. Her two daughters stood behind her, silent, watching. They were older than Aschenputtel, taller, beautiful in a sharp, deliberate way, with eyes accustomed to measuring and comparing. In the beginning, everything was correct. Meals were prepared. The house was orderly. Voices were gentle. The new woman, called Aschenputtel, her child smiled and rested a hand on her head in front of her father. The girls called her sister, praised her hair, and praised her nimble hands. On the surface, it was a perfect arrangement, a family neatly repaired after loss. And her father was satisfied. He saw exactly what he wanted to see. A capable wife who kept the household running. Two well-behaved daughters. A new order forming one that required little effort from him. The relief showed in the way he exhaled each evening, in the way he sat at the table without wondering who would cook the next day, who would wash, who would make sure everything held together. Only Aschenputtel began to disappear, not all at once, not through blows or shouted commands. She vanished in small ways, nearly invisible ones. Her dresses were replaced with older clothes for work. Her room was reassigned because the sisters needed more space. More chores were given to her because she was young and needed to learn how to help the family. Every change had a reason. Every reason sounded reasonable. And her father accepted all of it. When Aschenputtel spent longer hours in the kitchen, her hands covered in flour and ash, he did not ask. When she no longer sat at the table for meals, he did not notice. When she began lowering her head, whenever adults spoke, he mistook it for obedience. The truth was never spoken aloud, and so he never had to face it. Sometimes there were rare moments when Aschenputtel looked toward him, brief moments filled with hope and fear, but he was tired, or distracted, or already thinking of his next journey. He saw his daughter standing there dirty and silent, and in his mind, a more comfortable story formed. The girl was becoming lazy, that she did not take care of herself, that she simply needed more discipline. The new woman did not need to say much. A well-timed sigh, a gentle shake of the head, a comment about how she had tried. how she truly had tried to help Aschenputtel adjust, but the child seemed unwilling. These words landed in her father's ears like small stones, not painful, but enough to slowly fill every doubt. And then he began to travel more, longer journeys, weeks away from home. He said it was for the family, for their future. Aschenputtel stood at the door and watched him leave and each time the same familiar feeling rose in her chest. Not fear, but a cold understanding. That was when he turned his back. Things would grow worse. And somewhere deep inside, he knew this. But he went anyway. That was his guilt. Not an act, but a choice. He chose to believe in the order he could see, rather than confront the complicated and uncomfortable truth. He chose a well-run household over a child who needed protection. He did not strike Aschenputtel. He did not shout at her. He did not harm her directly. He simply did not see. And in that blindness, other things began to happen. Aschenputtel learned to move quietly like a shadow. She learned to work without making a sound. She learned to endure small needle-sharp words spoken when no outsiders were present. She learned that if she stayed silent long enough, everything passed more quickly. And each time her father returned, she stood in a corner and waited for him to notice that something had changed. He never did. When he looked at her, his gaze passed over her, the way it passed over furniture that had been in the room too long to draw attention. And in that look, Aschenputtel felt something worse than violence. The knowledge that she was no longer something worth protecting. The house remained standing. The family continued to exist. There were no screams loud enough, no scenes dramatic enough to force intervention. Everything happened within the boundaries of what was called normal. And because of that, no one believed she needed saving. Her mother's death had opened a hollow space. Her father's silence poured concrete into it, turning it into a pit with no bottom. And Aschenputtel fell into that pit. Little by little while, the one person who could have reached for her turned away, believing he had done enough. This is how silent betrayal works. It leaves no obvious bruises. It leaves behind a child who learns how to disappear inside her own home. And then when Aschenputtel had learned how to disappear, they began turning her into something else. Not through a grand decision or a clear declaration, only through small things, quiet changes, orders spoken as if they were the most natural thing in the world. Hell rarely arrives with fire gates and screams. Hell often begins with a cold look and a simple sentence. From now on, this is your work. Everything shifted fully into the kitchen. They say the kitchen is the heart of the home, but the kitchen in Aschenputtel's house was no warm heart. It was a black mouth, swallowing time, swallowing strength, swallowing youth day after day. There was always ash there. Ash clung to the stone floor, to the hem of her clothes, to her hair. It worked its way under her fingernails and refused to leave, no matter how much she scrubbed. Ash has a very particular smell. The smell of something that has finished burning something that has died, yet still lies there as evidence. Aschenputtel's day began before dawn, not waking early in the way people boast about, but being pulled from sleep while her body was still heavy as stone and her mind still wrapped in fog. She had to light the fire while the hearth was cold, blowing life into the embers until the flames rose high enough to cook for the household. Fire is not patient. It demands attention. It demands watching. It demands that you bend your face close and breathe in the sharp smoke until your eyes fill with tears. Some mornings she coughed and cried, and her stepmother passed by and glanced once as if tears were simply part of the job. Then came the water. Water was always the first task, and the one that never ended. The well stood in the yard. The wooden bucket was heavy. The rough rope cut into her hands. She hauled the water up bucket by bucket and carried it inside. It spilled icy cold, soaking through cloth, numbing her fingers. No one cared whether her hands went numb. There had to be water. The kitchen had to be hot. The floor had to be clean. The clothes had to be washed. The house had to look respectable when her father returned. So the work followed the work without space to breathe. She prepared breakfast, cleared dishes, scrubbed pots, and scoured the floor. The stone floor was never clean in the true sense. It was only clean enough for her stepmother not to find a reason to make her do it again. And her stepmother always found a reason. A dull mark, a corner is not fully dry, a smell not quite right. Do it again. A short sentence, but heavy as a verdict, because it meant her time did not belong to her. At midday, she cooked again, cleaned again, scrubbed again. In the evening, she prepared supper, washed again, swept again, wiped again. Day after day, always the same. And the most cruel thing was not the exhaustion, but the repetition. It wears a person down slowly, evenly, like water dripping onto stone. There was never a moment large enough to call a tragedy, only a chain of small moments, and that chain slowly erased the memory of who she had once been. Her hands changed first. The skin thickened, cracks opened at the knuckles from cold water and harsh soap. Her nails were always rimmed with black she could never fully wash away. Her back ached with a constant dull pain, like a cord pulled tight and never released. Her knees bruised from kneeling on stone. Her hair was no longer brushed each night, no neat braids, no ribbons. It became a dark, tangled mass that held ash and always smelled faintly of smoke. But even that was not enough, because what they wanted to take was not only her strength, they wanted to take her name. At first, the stepsister spoke sweetly in front of her father. "Little sister, poor thing, she is still adjusting." But when the door closed, when the sound of her father's wagon faded down the road, their voices changed, sharper, colder, carrying a childish delight far more frightening than anger, the delight of those who know they can hurt someone without consequence. One day, as Ashenputel bent to gather crumbs from beneath the table, one sister laughed. "Look at her," she said, as if pointing out an animal in a stall. "She is always covered in ash. Ash in her hair, ash on her face, ash on her clothes. Yes," the other added, looking her up and down. "She is nothing but cinders." Their mother did not laugh aloud. She only smiled slightly, like someone who has found the correct name for an object. "Ash," she said slowly, tasting the word. "Ashenputtel." Then she looked at Ashenputtel, her eyes without warmth. "Ash fool. That will be your name, because you belong with Ash more than at the table." And just like that, her name was thrown into the kitchen with the charcoal scraps. Her true name may have remained on paper somewhere, certainly in memory, but in that house where she was called by another name, every day her real name became a luxury, something belonging only to the past, like the fine dress her mother once made, like her mother's laughter when the days were still bright and life still wide. Ash Fool they called when they wanted her to fetch something. Ash Fool when they wanted her to scrub the floor again. Ash Fool when they wanted to remind her that she was no longer the daughter of a respectable merchant, no longer a child who was loved. She was only a pair of hands, a shadow, a part of the kitchen. Do you know what happens when someone is called a name long enough? At first they hate it. They despise it. It makes them shake with shame. But over time, the name becomes rhythm. It becomes the daily knocking inside the head. And one day you realize you respond to it faster than to your real name. Not because you want to, but because your body learns how to survive. Her stepmother did not need to strike her to inspire fear. She only needed to make sure everything could always become worse. A look, a vague threat, a needle-thin sentence. "Do not disappoint me." In houses like that, violence is not always loud. Sometimes it is the cold certainty that one wrong step will steal the rest of your day. And her father. He returned now and then, carrying goods and the smell of the road, tired and distracted. He saw a cleaner house, full meals, a gentle new wife. He saw her daughters speak well, sing, embroider, and in the corner of the kitchen he saw Ashenputtel, ash on her cheap clothes, gray, silent. Sometimes her eyes lifted and met his. In that moment lived an unspoken plea. "Look at me. Really look." But he looked the way one looks at an inconvenience, something confusing, something that stirred guilt for a brief instant before he pushed it aside with a reasonable thought. She must work harder. She must obey her mother. She should be grateful. as if gratitude could replace protection. And each time something in Aschenputtel slipped away like ash falling from a sleeve, quiet, unseen, but it accumulated. Night was the worst part, and also the most familiar. When the fire finally died, when the pots were washed, when the floor had been scrubbed until her hands burned, when the family upstairs had gone to bed and their laughter faded, Aschenputtel was allowed to rest. But rest only meant she would not be called anymore. She had no bed, a bed her stepmother said would dirty the sheets. She slept in the kitchen by the hearth, in ash still faintly warm. Ash clung to her skin, her hair, her eyelids. She curled herself tight, searching for a position that hurt the least, listening to the wood crack softly as embers collapsed. Some nights she watched the fire shrink, watched her shadow stretch along the stone wall, and felt as if her entire life were shrinking the same way. Some nights she fell asleep from sheer exhaustion and dreamed of her mother. Not her mother dead, but alive, brushing her hair, speaking her true name. And when she woke, ash on her face, the hearth cold, a voice called down from above, "Ash fool, get up. Where is the water? Where is the fire?" People speak of hell as a place beneath the earth, full of fire and demons. But if you had asked Aschenputtel, then hell lived in the kitchen, not because of the flames, but because of repetition, because of the feeling that tomorrow would be no different from today. Because you begin to suspect that your life will always be nothing but ash. The only thing that kept her from vanishing entirely was the narrow path to the graveyard. Whenever she could, and could usually meant late at night when the house was quiet, she slipped outside, crossed the yard, past the trees, and went to her mother's grave. The night air was cold and black, but its cold was kinder than the cold inside the house. The darkness out there was at least honest. The hazel tree was still there, growing a little more each season, slender but strong, its leaves trembling in the wind like whispers. Aschenputtel sat at its roots, leaned her back against the trunk, and cried. At first for her mother, then for the pain, then because she no longer knew what she was crying for, only that the tears kept falling and her chest ached. She whispered the things she could never say at home. She spoke of being called Ash Fool. She spoke of Ash. She spoke of her father looking through her as if she were smoke, and sometimes when the wind shifted, she heard wings, soft, very soft, as if something had settled onto the branches to watch. She looked up, and in the darkness were small white points like sparks. White birds perched still bright-eyed, watching without blinking. They did nothing. They only watched. And strangely, for a girl deliberately unseen by her own house, the gaze of those birds felt like a kind of mercy, like proof that someone in the world still knew she existed, that something out there still remembered. She did not know what they were. She did not call them, but they appeared quietly, as if they had promised someone they would keep watch. And each time Aschenputtel felt something fragile, thin but real, that her story was not finished, not yet, not in ash, because ash is not only what remains after a fire dies. Ash also hides embers, and deep beneath it, something was still burning, small, buried, fed on each day. Something her stepmother could not see, her stepsisters could not understand, and her father had forgotten to protect. Something is waiting for the moment to rise, not as the cheerful fire of children's tales, but as another kind of flame, colder, more patient, and far more dangerous. And then, on an early spring day, when the air smelled of fresh earth, and everything seemed to begin again, a messenger knocked at their door. In his hand was a single sheet of paper bearing the royal seal. Only thin parchment, yet it changed the rhythm of the entire house. And in the kitchen, Aschenputtel stood still, ash on her hands, listening as her stepmother read aloud, her voice suddenly bright, as if she had finally glimpsed an open door, a door leading out of the ordinary, a door leading toward the thing she desired more than anything else, power. And when the letter was finished, Aschenputtel understood, though she did not yet know how, that the hell of the kitchen was about to take another shape. It might not be better, but it would be different. And while the entire house above began moving to the rhythm of that sealed letter, the stepmother bustling the stepsisters, chattering servants hurrying back and forth, Aschenputtel remained in the kitchen like a forgotten shadow. Ash clung to her hands. Smoke clung to her hair, and the name Ash Fool still pressed down on her shoulders like an old saddle, heavy and chafing raw. No one asked her opinion. She was not even allowed to dream. Even when the decree said that every unmarried maiden must attend, her stepmother read that line, as if it applied to the entire kingdom except her. There are forms of power that do not need to raise their voice. They only need to look straight at you and treat you as an obvious exception. But when night fell, when the rooms above grew quiet, and only dying embers remained in the hearth, Aschenputtel did what she had done for years. She slipped outside. The back door creaked softly. Night wind struck her face, cold and real. The sky held no lights, only dark patches and a few needle-thin stars. She crossed the yard, quickly took the narrow path, like someone who knows that being seen would require no explanation of consequences. The graveyard lay behind the church, not far yet. It always felt like another world. No one spoke loudly there. No one laughed. Sound was swallowed by earth and stone. Only footsteps in wet grass and the sound of her own heart remained. The hazel tree on her mother's grave had grown much larger than when she first planted it. Its trunk was no longer fragile. It stood upright, with weight like someone who had learned how to endure wind and snow. Its branches reached outward, weaving into a thin canopy. The leaves trembled lightly, not from strong wind, but as if the tree were breathing on its own. Aschenputtel sat beneath it and leaned her back against the trunk, feeling the bark rough and cool. The scent of earth here was different from the kitchen. In the kitchen was the smell of something that had finished burning. Here was the smell of something still alive, even while living beside the dead. She placed her hand on the soil covering the grave, at the very place where she once knelt, and cried until she had no tears left. And inside her rose something both familiar and frightening. The feeling that she was speaking to a place that knew how to listen. She never spoke her mother's name aloud in the house. There, her mother's name had become an unspoken taboo, as if saying it would make everything too real. But here beneath the hazel tree, she could whisper. "Mother," she said, her voice so small it was barely breath. "I came again." Sometimes she did not know why she came, only that if she did not, she would suffocate. She spoke to the tree as if to a person. She spoke of the work that ground her down through repetition. She spoke of the needle-sharp words of her stepsisters. She spoke of her stepmother's gaze, not angry, only calculating. She spoke of her father standing close, yet impossibly far. "He looks at me and does not see me," she whispered, and the sentence fell to the ground like a small stone, silent but heavy. That night she also spoke of the royal letter, of the sound of her stepmother's voice when she read it, suddenly bright like the scent of blood, of how the household began preparing as if their lives were about to pass through a doorway, while she was only a piece of furniture to be moved out of sight. "I know I am not allowed to go." Aschenputtel said, her throat tightening. "I know they will never let me step into that place. But mother, if this is the only chance, if there is one place in the world where I could step out of Ash just once." She stopped, not from shame, but because she heard something, a faint rustle above her. Aschenputtel looked up, one white point on a branch, then another, and then as if they had always been there, and she had only just been permitted to see them, white birds appeared more densely among the leaves. Small birds, their feathers bright in the darkness, like torn scraps of paper. Their eyes were dark and glossy, fixed on her without blinking. They did not sing. There was none of the cheerful daytime chirring people expect. Their silence was what unsettled her. It felt like a tension, like a courtroom after everyone has taken their seat and waits for the charge to be read. Aschenputtel swallowed. Though she was used to seeing them, this night was different. Tonight she felt measured, as if she had not come to beg, but to be recognized. For a brief moment she wondered what they were. Birds are just birds, are they not? But these birds were unlike those in the fields. They arrived at the right moment. They stood in the right place. They looked at her like a story, not like crumbs. Then the hazel leaves trembled more strongly. Not from wind. The night wind had not changed. This movement felt like an answer, though the tree had no mouth to speak. Aschenputtel lowered herself automatically, as if her body remembered a ritual long forgotten. She pressed her forehead to the cold ground and whispered, "Mother, I am so tired." Tears flowed, quietly, without sobs. They seeped like water from a crack. The earth absorbed them without refusal, without judgment, and above her the white birds continued to watch. They offered no advice, no comfort. They did the one thing the house had refused to do for years. They saw her. Sometimes that alone is already magic, because being seen is not a small thing, not for someone who has been turned into an object, not for a girl called by a name that makes her forget who she once was. When someone truly looks at you, not to find fault, not to command, but to acknowledge that you exist, that you hurt, that you are still breathing, the feeling is both warm and frightening. Warm because it resembles love. Frightening because it reveals how long you have been starved of it. Aschenputtel sat up, wiped her face with her dirty sleeve, and let out a soundless laugh. "I am foolish," she said to herself. Then to the tree, "I keep coming here, speaking as if you truly hear me." One bird tilted its head slowly. A small motion, yet it sent a chill through her spine. She could not explain why, only that it felt like an answer, in a way reason could not touch. The next night she returned, and the night after that. Sometimes she did not come to cry. Sometimes she only sat in silence, her hand on the trunk. Her eyes were on the birds, letting the quiet settle around her, because that quiet felt less lonely than a house full of people. Her whispers grew shorter, no longer long explanations, only fragments falling like ash. They are sewing dresses. They are practicing dances. They are laughing. "I am here." Then one night, close to the first ball, she spoke the sentence she feared most, because once spoken it would become real. "Mother, if I ask, am I greedy?" The birds did not answer. The tree did not answer. But the leaves stirred, and in that moment, Aschenputtel felt as if an unseen hand rested on her shoulder. Not warm, not gentle in a human way, but ancient and severe, as if saying, "Speak, I am listening." And she did. Her voice was hoarse from smoke and tears. "I want to go. I want to step into the light even once. I want them to look at me and fall silent. I want to know what it feels like to not be ash." The wind passed through the branches. The sound of hazel leaves brushing together was like skirts touching in a vast hall. The white birds remained perched, eyes bright, unblinking. Aschenputtel understood something clearly, though she could not name it. The magic here was not the kind found in clean stories. It did not appear to make you happy. It appeared to do something else, to balance something long tilted, to remember, to witness, and if needed to return what had been taken. She did not know what return meant, only that beneath the hazel tree, where her mother lay, ran an unseen current between the living and the dead. Her mother had promised, and that promise, strangely, had not decayed. When Aschenputtel rose to return home, her legs were still tired, her hands were still dirty. The future was still dark, but something had changed. The sense that someone was walking with her, not by footsteps, but by attention. Above her, white birds lifted into the air. They did not sing. They only followed, a silent pale ring against the black sky, like thoughts that refused to fade. And in the kitchen, when she curled herself into the ash, she closed her eyes with a feeling she did not know before. Not hope, because hope is usually bright and fragile. This feeling was darker, heavier, more durable, like a cold key in a pocket, like a promise recalled, like something approaching slowly, precisely and impossible to stop. Above the roof, wind moved. In the hearth, embers dimmed. And in the graveyard, The hazel tree stood silent and full of memory, its branches crowded with white birds, creatures that offered no comfort, only their gaze, and because of that were more frightening than any words. The first night they went to the ball, the house grew loud in a way that felt painfully familiar. Not laughter, not joy, but preparation, the sound of fabric being pulled, shoes tried on and taken off again, orders spoken as if they were air itself. Aschenputtel was already in the kitchen before nightfall. She heard everything. She always heard everything. You know that feeling, don't you? When you are very close to the light, but it does not belong to you. When music drifts down from a room above, and every note reminds you that you are standing in the wrong place. The stepmother and the two stepsisters descended the stairs in their new dresses. Fabric brushed against fabric. Fabric did not brush against Aschenputtel. No one looked at her. Her father stood there adjusting his collar, satisfied as if everything had finally settled into order. He did not ask if she wanted to go. The thought never occurred to him. Order is always easier than looking directly at a child being left behind. The carriage departed. The light left with it. Aschenputtel stood before the dying hearth, hands black, with ash hair heavy with smoke. Every night was the same. She could sit down. She could sleep in the ashes. No one would blame her. No one would remember her. But tonight, something refused to stay still. She opened the back door. No shoes, no cloak, only the weight in her chest. The path to the hazel tree was dark and familiar. She walked it without looking. Beneath the tree, she knelt. The ground was cold. She placed her hand on the earth, where her mother lay, and spoke very softly. "They have gone." The hazel tree stirred. White birds appeared. No song, only watching. They always watched. Aschenputtel lowered her head. She was used to lowering her head, but here beneath the tree it was not from fear, only exhaustion. Then the dress fell. There was no sparkling transformation. It simply fell. Light, precisely placed. Beside it lay the golden shoes, cold, smooth, as if they had been waiting for a very long time. Aschenputtel did not smile. She did not say thank you. She only looked, and in that moment she understood that this was not a reward. It was an opportunity, and opportunities always have a cost. She changed. Ash fell to the ground. The dress settled against her body as if it already knew it. When she slipped on the shoes, she hesitated for a single beat. Do you know the feeling of wearing something that fits for the first time? No pain, no excess, just right. It makes you realize that everything before was wrong. She walked. No carriage, no horses, only walking. The path to the palace felt shorter than she remembered. Light opened ahead of her. Aschenputtel stopped at the threshold. She straightened her back. Just once. Then she stepped inside. The prince saw her while pretending to care about a story he had heard too many times. He looked up, then stopped. Not because she was beautiful, but because something about her did not follow the rules he knew. He approached her. "I have never seen you before," he said. Not a question, a statement. "Because I am not often seen," she replied. They danced, not perfectly, not in harmony at first, but they found a rhythm. Like two people who did not belong to this room but briefly shared the same air. He spoke of the palace, of days that repeated themselves. She listened. She was always good at listening. When he asked her name, she was silent. When he asked where she came from, she looked toward the darkness beyond the windows. There was too much light here. It warmed her skin in a way that felt dangerous. When the clock drew close to midnight, she felt it before she heard it. She stepped back. "I have to go," she said. He held her hand, just slightly. Then it. She turned away. She did not run. She simply left. The darkness received her like something familiar. The second night she returned. The dress was brighter. The shoes are still cold. The prince was waiting. When he saw her, he exhaled like someone waking from sleep. "I thought you were not real," he said. She did not deny it. They danced longer. He asked more questions. She answered fewer. She knew this light was not meant for her. She knew daylight would expose everything. She left earlier. He followed her to the steps, called after her, gave orders. But the night did not listen to him. The third night was heavier, the dress darker, as if the hazel tree knew this was the last time. The prince did not leave her side. He wanted answers, a name, to hold her. When the clock struck midnight, she turned away. This time the steps were coated with pitch. The golden shoes stuck fast. She pulled her foot free. She did not look back. She did not apologize. She left the shoe behind. The prince stood there holding the pitch-stained slipper, cold gold in his hand. He understood that darkness does not disappear. It only leaves evidence. Aschenputtel ran, barefoot, cold earth beneath her feet. Her heart is pounding. She did not cry. When she returned to the kitchen, the ashes were still there. She curled into them as she did every night. But tonight the ashes could no longer hide everything. Something had begun, and it would not stop. Outside the hazel tree stood unmoving. White birds perched among its branches. They had seen. They always saw. And they were still waiting. Aschenputtel ran 3 times, not because anyone chased her, not because a hand reached out to seize her, but because each time the light came too close, her body turned away on its own, like a wound recoiling when exposed to air. The first time she ran out of fear. She feared the moment the light would stop moving, the moment the question would no longer be, "Who are you?" but "Where do you come from?" The moment she would have to stand still and be examined, looked at long enough for what could not be hidden to surface. Rough hands, old marks that do not vanish because of a borrowed dress, silence that is not pride, but habit learned from years of not being allowed to speak. You can dance, you can smile, but you cannot pretend to be someone else when someone begins to look for too long. When the clock drew near midnight, Aschenputtel felt it in her chest before she heard it. The feeling was like standing before a door and knowing that if it opened, everything would change in a way that could not be undone. She turned away, not in panic, just retreating, like an old habit pulling her back toward a safe darkness. The second time she ran because of hesitation. The light was softer on the second night. The prince spoke more, asked less. He spoke like someone who had never truly been listened to. Aschenputtel listened, and in that moment she nearly forgot the role she was playing, nearly forgot the ash, nearly believed she could stand there a little longer. That moment was what frightened her, because if she stayed, if she allowed it, this would no longer be magic. It would become a choice. And choices demand answers. They force you to admit that you want something. They force you to accept that you are stepping away from the place that kept you alive for so many years, even if that place was cruel. She left earlier than the first night. She did not wait for the clock. She did not wait for a hand to stop her. She left while the light was still gentle, while nothing had yet become fully real. Darkness received her like a familiar place. It did not question her. It did not demand. It was simply accepted. The third time she ran because she knew. On the third night, Aschenputtel knew this would be the last time. Not because the hazel tree would refuse another dress, not because the magic would expire, but if she stayed once more, she would no longer be able to pretend she was only passing through the light. The prince looked at her like someone afraid of losing something he had not yet named. He wanted to hold the moment still. He wanted answers, a name. And that was exactly what Aschenputtel could not give, because if she spoke her name, she would have to carry everything that name contained. If she stayed, she would have to let the light see her entire self. Not the version borrowed from the hazel tree, but who she truly was. When the pitch clung to the steps and the golden shoe slipped from her foot, she did not look back. Not out of nobility, not out of courage. But if she turned, she would have to face the gaze holding that shoe. A gaze that wanted to find, to confirm, to make this moment something she could not retreat from. She ran because she understood that magic does not save anyone. It only brings you to the door. And sometimes that door is more frightening than the darkness you already know. Aschenputtel ran back to the kitchen, back to the ash, back to the place where no one demanded she explain who she was. She curled into herself as she did every night, but tonight was different, not because magic lingered, but because she knew something had been exposed, even if only for a moment. Somewhere out there, someone held the shoe and believed it was a key. Somewhere out there, light was trying to find its way into the dark. And Aschenputtel knew she could not keep running forever. Running 3 times was not avoidance. It was the only truth she knew at the time, that sometimes survival is not about staying, it is about knowing when to leave. Magic does not redeem anyone, it only shows you what you could be. Whether you become that thing or not is another story. And that story Aschenputtel understood very clearly had not yet begun. Beneath the hazel tree, the white birds remained silent. They had seen all 3 escapes. They did not interfere. They did not judge. They only remembered. And memory, like ash, never disappears completely. And then the golden slipper began to live a life of its own. You might think it was just an object, a small, beautiful, cold thing left behind on the palace steps. But in old stories, objects are never just objects. They are evidence. They are oaths. They are hooks fate uses to drag people out of the places where they are hiding. The prince held the slipper in his hands and stared at it for a long time. He did not look at it as a shoe. He looked at it as an answer, as a door. I will find her, he said to the empty hall, as if the darkness itself needed to hear. And the very next morning, the order went out. Not an invitation, not a request, an order. Take the slipper through the entire kingdom. Go to every house. Call every unmarried maiden forward. Try it. Try until it fits. It sounds romantic when told quickly, when everything else is skipped. But think carefully. Imagine strangers moving from house to house carrying an object and a command. Imagine doors opening one by one, families tightening with fear, girls being called forward to stand beneath unfamiliar eyes, told to offer their foot like something to be measured, not for love, for power, for obedience, because a prince wanted to finish what he had begun. The search lasted many days. Some homes welcomed them eagerly. Others watched in silence and fear. No one dared refuse. The slipper carried the royal seal, and in those times, a royal seal could quiet an entire village. Then one morning, they knocked on Aschenputtel's door. The knock was firm and deliberate, not polite. The knock of someone who knows the door will be opened. Her stepmother was in the front room. She turned sharply, her face draining of color, then flushing red, like fire catching oil. "They are here," she said, and her voice changed, shaking and sharp at once. "Quickly, upstairs. Put on your finest things. Hair, hands, face. Quickly." The stepsisters rushed up the stairs as if they had waited their entire lives for this moment. Aschenputtel was in the kitchen. Her hands were wet, dirty, stained with ash and soap. She heard the movement above and did not lift her head at once. She was used to important things happening without her, but then she heard the words. They brought the slipper. She understood immediately. Her heart tightened. The stepmother descended into the kitchen like a human-shaped storm cloud. She looked at Aschenputtel. Her gaze was not angry. It was worse. It calculated. "Listen carefully," she said slowly. "You are not to appear. You are not to show your face. You are not to stand in the doorway. You are not to let them see you." Aschenputtel did not answer. To the attic, the stepmother said, "Now." Aschenputtel opened her mouth as if to say something, not to argue, only to repeat the order about every unmarried girl, but the stepmother did not allow it. Her hand struck fast, not hard, just enough. Aschenputtel's lips split. The metallic taste of blood bloomed quickly, quietly. "The attic," the stepmother repeated, her voice low. "If you ruin this, I will make you regret being born." Aschenputtel went. She did not cry. She did not scream. She climbed the narrow stairs, stepped into the darkness of the attic, and heard the latch slide into place behind her. A small click, but it sounded like a prison door. Below, they welcomed the prince's men with voices sweet as honey. The stepmother smiled. She offered drinks. She spoke of the family's honor. The stepsisters emerged in beautiful dresses, hair arranged, faces prepared, beautiful in a practiced way. The man carrying the slipper was not the prince. He was an official, a steward, someone worn down by the road. You could hear the exhaustion in his voice. He no longer felt excitement. He only wanted it to be finished. "Please try," he said. The elder stepsister sat down and extended her foot. In the attic, Ashen Patil pressed her ear to the floor. She heard the chair move, fabric rustle, the room holding its breath. She heard their hope, a kind of hope that was not beautiful. It was hungry, greedy, willing to bite. The slipper was brought forward. Then there was a pause, longer than normal. What do you think happens in that pause? Below, the stepmother smiled. She looked at her daughter, at the slipper, at the future she had already drawn in her mind. Then she understood. The foot did not fit, and not fitting meant everything was over. It meant returning to this house, to debts, to aging into worthlessness, to the small, ordinary life she despised. So she did what only old stories dare to say plainly. "Wait," the stepmother said. "Give the girl a moment." The prince's man hesitated, but her voice was gentle, maternal. She led her daughter into a side room away from watching eyes. The door closed. In the attic, Aschenputtel felt cold run down her spine, not because she understood immediately, but because she had lived long enough in that house to know, when doors close, the worst often begins. Voices carried upward, blurred, but clear enough. "It does not fit," the daughter said, her voice shaking. "Then make it fit," the stepmother replied calmly. "How?" A drawer slid open. Metal touched metal, soft, cold. Aschenputtel stopped breathing. "No," the daughter whispered. "Just a little," the stepmother said. "Listen to me. Just a little. Blood. Blood can be wiped away." The stepmother cut in. "Do you want an entire life or a piece of flesh?" In the attic, Aschenputtel stepped back, a hand covering her mouth. She knew she was about to hear something she would never forget. The stepmother continued like a lesson, like a truth being taught. "A part of the body in exchange for a lifetime," she said. "Do you think queens walk much? Do you think people marry feet? They marry crowns. They marry status. They marry names." The daughter cried, not from morality, from fear, from imagined pain, from the moment of choosing. "What do you want?" the stepmother asked evenly. "To stay here, grow old, be laughed at, or to step into the royal carriage?" In clean stories, this is where the teller stops. This is where they turn away. This is where they say it is too horrible. Old stories do not stop. They go straight through because they want you to see. They want you to understand what humans will do when desire becomes hunger. In the attic, Aschenputtel heard sobbing, then a short strangled sound like a scream swallowed whole. She did not hear details, only enough to know the impossible had happened. The door opened. The elder sister returned to the front room. Her face was white, a smile fixed onto her mouth like something forced. "Try again," she said hoarsely. The prince's man knelt and slid the slipper on. This time it fit. Do you understand? It fit. In some way it fit. And that was enough. The room exhaled. The stepmother glowed, believing she had won. The prince's man looked at the slipper, at the girl. Something felt wrong, but he was too tired. Too many houses, too many feet, too many disappointments. When something fit, he wanted to believe. "Please come with us," he said, "to the palace." The girl stood, took a step, then another. She walked like someone afraid of touching the ground, but she walked, and that was all they needed. Just enough to reach the carriage. The door opened. Daylight poured in. The stepmother watched her daughter leave with the face of someone who had traded her life. The carriage rolled away. In the attic, Aschenputtel sat motionless. She did not cry yet. Some shocks are too large for tears. There was only an emptiness like cold ash. But the story was not finished. It never ends that quickly. Not long after hooves returned, wheels, shouting, chaos. The carriage stopped hard at the door. Voices argued. The prince's man spoke loudly, his voice sharp with anger and disgust. The stepmother ran out. "What is happening?" The man cut her off. "What did you do?" No, it fit." "Fit," he snapped. "Do you think no one sees blood?" The stepmother froze for a heartbeat, then tried to smile, tried to speak, tried to fix it, but outside wings sounded. You remember the white birds. They do not speak, they watch, and when needed, they remind others where to look. They perch on the carriage roof, on fences, on nearby branches, blindingly white in daylight. They did not sing like ordinary birds. They made sharp grating sounds, like words humans do not want to hear. The prince's man bent and looked at the slipper, then at the dark red stain inside. He did not need full understanding. He only needed to know he had been deceived. And this deception was not cleverness. It was desperation. A house willing to mutilate its own child to escape its old life. He turned to the stepmother, his face pale with fury and revulsion. "Is there another girl?" he asked. The stepmother blinked rapidly. She understood. The chance was not gone. It had merely moved. "Yes," she said. "There is another." The second stepsister was dragged forward. She had heard everything. She looked at her sister, at her mother, at the slipper, and in her eyes was something clear: fear and desire. Because in that house, desire was taught as duty. Again the stepmother asked for a private moment. This time the prince's man hesitated longer, suspicious, but the order remained. "Try them all." The door closed again. In the attic, Aschenputtel pressed her ear to the floor once more. She did not want to hear, but she could not stop. "It does not fit," the second daughter said, shaking. "Then make it fit," the stepmother replied, repeating a sentence she had likely spoken all her life, a part of the body for a lifetime. "No," the girl breathed. "What do you want?" the stepmother asked coldly. "To stay here and wither, or to go with the prince?" There was no moral speech, no rescuer, only a closed door and a mother teaching her child how to sacrifice the wrong thing. Aschenputtel closed her eyes. She heard metal touch again, then a sound pressed down and cut short. Not long, but enough to return in nightmares for years. The door opened. The second sister emerged pale as the first, a smile worn like a mask. The slipper was tried again, and again it fit. The prince's man watched. He did not want to believe now, but he was trapped between doubt and command. He watched her walk, saw the stiffness, the strange gait, but she managed a few steps. And sometimes, in stories like this, a few steps are enough for people to lie to themselves. The carriage rolled away again. Then wings sounded once more. Not long after, the carriage returned again, faster this time. The prince's man no longer bothered with courtesy. He stood in the doorway and looked at the stepmother like something foul. "Enough," he said. "Is there anyone else in this house who has not tried?" The stepmother opened her mouth. She could have said no. She could have ended it. She could have buried this forever. But Aschenputtel's father stood there. And this time he spoke. Not from bravery, perhaps from fear. Perhaps because he had finally been cornered where pretending no longer worked. "There is one more," he said quietly. "My daughter from my first marriage." The air in the house shifted instantly. The stepmother turned on him, her eyes cutting. "She is only the kitchen girl," she said quickly. "Unfit, she is." "Bring her down," the prince's man said, his voice dry with exhaustion. "Bring her here." In the attic, the latch slid back. The door opened. The stepmother appeared, her face stone cold. She seized Aschenputtel's arm and dragged her down the stairs. She bent close and whispered each word, biting. "If you speak of what you heard, I will kill you." Aschenputtel did not answer. She stepped into the front room and stood before unfamiliar eyes. She was dirty, gray, ash, And in that moment, the prince's man was nearly certain it could not be her, but he knelt anyway, because the slipper was here, because the order was here, because sometimes justice in fairy tales does not come from kindness, it comes from stubborn procedure. Your foot, he said. Aschenputtel extended it. Not beautiful, not clean, but real. The golden slipper slid on, and it fit, not forced, not desperate. It fit as if it had been waiting for this foot from the beginning. The prince's man froze. He looked up at her face, looked more closely, and for the first time he truly looked. It is you, he said, like an exhale. Behind her, the stepmother made a strangled sound, as if something inside her throat had snapped. The stepsisters collapsed, faces drained of blood. Aschenputtel did not say much. She only stood there, gold on her foot ash, on her hands. You might think this was victory, but if you looked into her eyes, you would see something else, fear. Because being found can be as frightening as being abandoned, because when the light truly reaches you, there is nowhere left to hide. The prince's man rose and bowed to her. Deeply, not because of magic, but because the fit was true and the truth undeniable. Please come, he said. The prince is waiting, and in the yard, the white birds perched in silence. They did not sing. They did not celebrate. They only watched, as they always had, as if this were only one part of the story. The next part, the one people prefer not to tell, was already approaching. Magic does not redeem anyone, but it has opened the door. And now no one could close it again. The slipper had found its foot, not in a romantic way. There was no music, no grand declaration, only a bare fact standing in the middle of the room, a fact that did not need defending because it could stand on its own. The prince's man looked at Aschenputtel for a long time, not to confirm her beauty, but to confirm something else. A familiar sensation returning and settling into the right place, like finding something lost long ago and realizing you had never truly forgotten it. Please come, he said again, and this time there was no doubt left in his voice. Aschenputtel stepped out of the house. She did not look back. She did not look at her stepmother. She did not look at the stepsisters, sitting motionless like shadows stripped of their shape. Daylight touched her, not gently, not kindly, simply light, the very thing she had run from 3 times. The carriage began to roll, and then the birds appeared. They did not arrive loudly, not suddenly. They were simply there, as if they had never left, perched on fences, on the roof of the carriage, on branches lining the road, white in a way that felt unnatural beneath the sun. The driver looked up first. He frowned, not from fear, from irritation. Birds usually scatter when chased away. These did not. They watched. They tilted their heads. They waited. Then they began to sound, not a song, not melody. Short, even sounds repeated, as if something long memorized was being recited. The prince's man listened, and a chill moved along his spine. He did not understand every sound, but he understood the meaning. Something was wrong. He bent down and looked at the slipper again, looked more closely, not at the gold, but at the signs he had tried not to see before. He stopped the carriage. Stop, he said. The driver pulled the reins. The birds perched closer. They did not scream. They only repeated, again, 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 like a sentence being read slowly. The prince's man turned and looked at the 2 girls sitting in the carriage. He did not ask. He did not need to. Truth does not require questions once it stands exposed. Get down, he said. His voice was not angry, not contemptuous, only tired, like someone who had just realized he had allowed a mistake to travel too far. They returned to the house. The stepmother came to the door when the carriage stopped at the gate again. A smile had already formed, but it never found its place. She saw the prince's man's face. She saw the birds, and in that moment she understood. The game was over. There was no long argument, no defense. No one wanted to hear it anymore. The truth had been spoken in a way humans do not control, spoken by things that do not negotiate. The prince's man entered the house once more. Is there anyone else here? He asked. Not loudly, but enough to silence everything. Aschenputtel's father stood there. He looked at the floor, then he looked up. This time he did not turn away. Only the kitchen girl, he said, and no one interrupted him. Aschenputtel was called forward, not dragged, not driven, simply called. She stepped out. Ash is still on her hands. Old clothes, no magic, no hazel tree, no birds intervening. Only her. The slipper was brought out once more. This time, no one doubted. No one held their breath. It fit as it always had. Truth does not change because people try to avoid it. The prince's man bowed. Deeply, "I am sorry," he said. Not an apology from one man, but an apology from a system that had just realized how far it had allowed its error to go. The stepmother said nothing. The stepsister said nothing. They did not cry. They did not beg. In stories like this, those who commit the worst acts rarely react as expected. They are simply empty because every belief they used to survive has been stripped away at once. The birds fell silent, not out of mercy, not out of satisfaction, only because everything had been placed where it belonged. Aschenputtel was taken away, not amid cheers, not beneath admiring gazes, only in the heavy quiet of something irreversible. Behind her, the house remained standing. It did not collapse. It did not burn. It was not punished by magic. It was simply left behind with the people who had destroyed themselves through their own choices. Justice in this story has no human face. It does not ask whether you regret your actions. It does not weigh circumstances. It does not measure pain to decide a fitting punishment. It simply happens, cold, precise, without emotion. The birds lifted into the air when the carriage departed again. They did not escort. They did not follow. They returned to the hazel tree, to the place where a promise had been planted with tears many years before. Aschenputtel looked straight ahead. Daylight lay there, not softer, not kinder, but this time she did not lower her head, not because of victory, but because there was no longer a reason to hide. And if you think this is a happy ending, it is not. This is only the moment when truth stops being concealed. What comes after how one lives with that truth is another story. One without guiding birds, without a whispering tree, only people, and what they do with what has been exposed. Aschenputtel stepped into the light without cheers. There was no music, no praise. No one spoke her name as if a miracle had just been born. The light was simply daylight, blunt and unmerciful, falling on everything with the same force. It did not ask how long she had endured. It did not promise to make things easier. It was simply there, waiting to see how she would stand. She stood upright, not because anyone told her to, not because magic was holding her back straight, but because for the first time, nothing was forcing her to bow. The prince's man looked at her one last time before the carriage moved. Not a searching look, not a doubtful one. Just confirmation, like a task completed, no need to return to it. The golden slipper rested on her foot. Not new, not brighter than before, but it fit in a way that needed no second check, no forcing, no persuasion. It fit because it was made for this foot, and only this foot. No blood, no pain, no price beyond stepping forward. You might think this was a victory. Aschenputtel did not. She thought of the kitchen, of the ash, of nights curled tight, making herself smaller to avoid being seen. She thought of the 3 times she ran and understood that running too can be survival, not cowardice, just not yet the moment. The carriage rolled through the village road. People stood and watched. They watched out of curiosity, because they had heard the story, because the slipper had become something to talk about. But their gazes passed over Aschenputtel differently, not with contempt, not with fear, not with hunger. Just a look, and then it moved on. That lightened her more than any praise could have. In the distance, the hazel tree stood still. White birds perched on its branches and did not follow. They had finished their part. No song, no reminder. Justice once set in place does not repeat itself. Aschenputtel did not turn back to offer a farewell, not from bitterness, not from pride, but because the past does not require ceremony to remain behind. It stays whether you look at it or not. At the palace gates, no one hurried her. No one pulled at her hand. The gates opened as if for someone long expected, though no one said it aloud. She crossed the threshold, and this time the light did not blind her. The prince waited, not on a raised step, not behind ritual, just standing as a man. He looked at her, and this time he searched for nothing. He had already searched enough. "It is you," he said. Not a question. Aschenputtel nodded. She did not bow. There were no vows then, no hurried promises, only a silence long enough for both to breathe, long enough for the light to do what it does best, reveal without forcing. They walked inside. The palace was wide, bright, and cold, not a magic place, a place for things that must endure under many eyes. Aschenputtel felt that at once, and this time she did not wish to hide. The days that followed did not pass like a dream. There was no sudden transformation that erased old marks. Her hands remained rough. Silence still lingered, but no one demanded apologies for these things. No one required her to become someone else. When people asked her name, she spoke her true one. When they asked where she came from, she told the truth. Not everything, not hidden. Truth, when it is not forced, can stand without hurting anyone. The golden slipper was set aside, not because it lost value, but because it had fulfilled its only purpose, recognition. It did not need reverence. It did not need to become a symbol. It was simply something that fit and had done its work. You see, magic does not stay. It does not build houses. It does not feed anyone. It comes to open a door, and then it leaves. What remains belongs to people. Aschenputtel understood this better than anyone. She stepped into the light each day in a very ordinary way, by standing straight, by speaking when she chose, by remaining silent when she wished, not from fear, not from training, but because it was her choice. And if you are waiting for a perfect ending where everything is repaid and healed, this story is not for that. Aschenputtel did not become someone else. She did not forget. She was not cleansed of her past. She simply did not allow it to decide how she stood anymore. Light in the end is not a reward. It is a space, and how you enter it head lowered or not is the only thing that truly belongs to you. This story ends here, not because everything is perfect, but because Aschenputtel was recognized without force. No blood, no knives, no self-destruction. Only a simple fitting, late but true. And if you are still here now, perhaps you understand why old stories do not need to be cleaned. They are not told to soothe. They are told to remind us that sometimes the bravest thing is not to endure a little longer, but to step into the light and stand upright when at last you no longer have to bow. The wedding took place on a morning so clear that no shadow was thick enough to hide within it. The sunlight was not gentle, not warm and golden like in painted scenes. It was straight white and unforgiving, as if the day itself understood there would be no room for half measures. Aschenputtel stepped out when the church bells rang for the first time. No one led her. No one held her hand. She walked alone, slow and steady, as if she had walked this path for a long time. Already only today, the ground beneath her feet was no longer cold with ash. The wedding dress was not magic. It did not fall from branches. It did not shift colors in the light. It was real fabric, heavy touching her skin. When she wore it, Aschenputtel did not feel blessed. She felt acknowledged. No one asked her to bow. No one told her to hide her scars, her calloused hands, or the posture of someone who had once lived bent over a hearth. The prince waited at the church steps. He did not smile broadly. He did not perform. He watched her approach, and in his eyes there was no surprise, only certainty, as if everything had finally returned to where it belonged. The church was full. They came to witness, not to congratulate. Old stories do not need congratulations. They need witnesses. When Aschenputtel crossed the threshold, The birds appeared. No one called them. No one signaled. They came as if they had been invited long ago. White birds perched on the beams, on the high windows, on the cold stone ledges. They did not sing. They did not stir. They only watched. The ceremony began. The prayers were spoken in a steady ancient voice, as if they had been read for hundreds of years, and would be read for hundreds more. Aschenputtel listened, not because she feared forgetting. She had known the words for a long time from nights spent lying in ash, whispering to what could not be seen. In the back rows, the stepmother and the two stepsisters were led inside, not bound, not forced. They walked on their own feet. The stepmother went first, back straight, chin raised, as an old habit that refused to die. The two sisters followed, one on each side, trying to hold their composure, trying to keep their steps, even though nothing inside them was steady anymore. They sat down. No one turned to look at them at once, but the air shifted. Those nearby fell quiet, as if sensing the story was not finished. Aschenputtel did not turn around. She did not need to. She knew they were there. She had known for a long time. The vows were asked. She answered. Her voice was clear, unshaken. The prince answered after her. The bells rang a second time, and when the procession began to move, the birds took flight. Two flew low, very low. One settled on the right side of the elder sister, one on the left side of the younger, close enough that their breath brushed human skin. They did not strike at once. They moved with the procession step by step, as if counting the rhythm. The church fell completely silent. No one spoke. No one fully understood what was about to happen, but everyone felt that something could not be stopped. As the procession advanced, the birds dipped down. A short cry. Very short. The elder sister screamed. The scream did not last. It was cut short by her own terror. She raised her hands to her face, staggered, and missed a step. Someone reached out to catch her, but it was already too late. The bird rose, its beak closed. The elder sister's right eye no longer sees. Before the younger sister could understand what had happened, the bird on her side dipped as well. Not hurried, not angry, like a task already decided. She cried out, stumbled backward, and struck a pew. Her trembling hands covered her face. Her left eye went dark. No blood fell to the floor. No one described it. No one needed to. The choking sobs and the chaos of ragged breathing were enough. The stepmother turned. She saw her daughters. She saw the birds. She saw the faces of those around her, and for the first time in her life, she could not speak. Her lips moved, but no sound came. The procession continued. It did not stop. It did not pause. Old stories do not stop for the pain of the guilty. When the ceremony ended, when Aschenputtel and the prince turned to leave, the birds descended once more. This time they switched sides. The bird that had struck on the right moved left. The one from the left moved right. They followed the sisters, slow and patient. As the procession turned to leave the church, the birds dipped again. There was no loud scream this time, only the broken sobbing of two people who understood there was nothing left to keep. The remaining eye of each sister went dark. The stepsisters were completely blind. They were not killed. The birds did not kill. They took away sight. The very thing those women had used to measure envy, desire, and crush others beneath them. The stepmother collapsed. No one helped her up. No one comforted her. The birds did not touch her. She was left alive to see with memory alone, and that was her punishment. Aschenputtel stood on the steps. She looked straight ahead. She did not turn back. She did not raise her hand. She gave no command. She did not need to forgive. She did not need to seek revenge. Ancient justice does not ask the consent of the one who benefits. It moves on its own. The birds rose high. The church released a long breath. The wedding was complete. Aschenputtel stepped into the light. Her head was not bowed, not because of magic, but because there was nothing left that could force her to bow. People like to believe that every story ends when a crown is placed upon a head, as if cold metal could seal what has been fractured, as if power and light were enough to stitch together years lived in ash. But old stories know better. They do not end at victory. They simply change shape. Aschenputtel became queen before the eyes of the entire kingdom. Her name was spoken with reverence. Heads bowed when she passed. Doors once tightly shut now opened without a knock. Stairways that had once loomed high and threatening now lay level beneath her feet. On the surface, everything had changed, but her body did not forget. There were mornings when light flooded the palace windows, and Aschenputtel woke before any bell sounded. Not from worry, not from nightmares, simply from habit. A body that had learned to rise before dawn, to tend fire, to carry water, to begin a long day before others opened their eyes, still woke itself. Even without ash, without heavy buckets, the body stayed alert, as if sleeping too long might cause everything to be taken away. The prince, now king, slept beside her, breathing evenly. He slept like someone who had never needed to keep watch. Aschenputtel looked at him in the dim light and felt something both warm and distant. Love was there, safety was there, but between them and her remained a small, silent space where memory lived. She learned to be queen quickly, not because she was well taught, but because she was used to watching. She knew when to be silent, when to speak, when a nod carried more weight than a speech. She understood the looks of servants, of ministers, of women standing close to the walls at feasts. She had stood there once. She had been the shadow. But there were nights, after everything had settled, after the last footsteps faded from the corridors, when Aschenputtel sat alone by a window and placed her hand on the cold stone sill, not to remind herself of her power, but to remind herself that stone is still stone cold, is still cold, and the world does not soften simply because she survived it. The birds still came, not as often as before, not loudly. They perched in the tall trees of the palace garden, where few people walked. Sometimes in the late afternoons, when sunlight slanted low and shadows stretched long, Aschenputtel went there and sat. She did not call them. She did not ask. She simply sat, and the birds looked at her as they always had, without pity, without praise. They reminded her that magic had never been salvation. It had only been a tool, and tools do not heal wounds. They only open doors. Aschenputtel did many good things. People spoke of granaries opened in winter, of new laws protecting children without voices, of women allowed to leave houses where they had been treated as objects. She was praised, and the praise was deserved. Yet each time she heard it, she felt a faint weariness, as if wearing a coat heavier than necessary, because doing what is right does not erase what has been done. Some sounds still startled her. The soft, steady rhythm of a knife against a cutting board in the palace kitchens could still stiffen her shoulders for a moment so brief no one noticed. The smell of smoke from great hearths sometimes dried her throat, even though ash no longer clung to her hair, even though her hands now touched silk. The king asked her once, very softly, like someone afraid of breaking something fragile. He asked if she was happy. Aschenputtel did not answer at once. Happiness is a wide word. It does not fit easily on those who have lived long in darkness. She loved him. She was grateful for her life now. But happiness for her was not fullness. It was brief, quiet moments without pain. And those moments came and went, like birds that land and lift away again. She told him she was well, and that, in its way, was true. Years passed. The kingdom grew accustomed to the image of a queen who walked slowly back, straight gaze calm. People stopped whispering about ash, about birds, about what had happened on the wedding day. The story became legend. Then a lesson told to children softened its sharp edges, filed away. But Aschenputtel did not forget. She did not try to forget. Forgetting to her would have been a kind of betrayal, not of those who harmed her, but of the girl she once was. She carried memory as one carries a scar, not displayed, not hidden, simply lived with. When she grew old, when silver threads appeared in her hair, not made by light, Aschenputtel returned to the old house, not to live there, not to burn it. She stood in the kitchen that had once been her hell and looked at the stone floor now replaced at the light falling where there had once been only ash. She did not cry. She did not smile. She understood that victory had carried her away from that place, but it could not erase the road she had walked. And that was not a failure. It was simply the truth. People like to hope stories end in perfect healing, but ancient stories do not promise that. They only say this: you can go on living. You can stand upright. You can build something good from what is broken, but the cracks will remain, reminding you of who you once were. Aschenputtel lived a long life, long enough to see children grow up in a world a little gentler, not because of magic, but because of small choices repeated again and again, made by someone who once slept in ash and knew that darkness does not disappear on its own. And if anyone asks whether victory heals everything, the answer of old stories is always clear, even if it is never spoken aloud. No, but sometimes surviving and no longer bowing is enough to begin. Time does not arrive with footsteps. It arrives through silence. One morning, Aschenputtel realized she rose more slowly. On another afternoon, she noticed her hand tremble slightly while fastening a button. No pain, no drama, just the body telling the truth in a quiet, even voice that allows no negotiation. She had lived long enough to see what once seemed impossible become ordinary. The laws she signed, the shelters she helped build, the people who once stood pressed against walls are now stepping into the light with straighter backs. They called her a merciful queen. She heard it, nodded, and let the title pass like wind. She knew mercy was not a feeling. It was a habit shaped by remembering where one had once stood. In the late mornings of her life, she often sat by the window, watching the garden change with the seasons. Birds came and went, no longer in large flocks like before. They were no longer needed. The work of magic had been finished long ago. This world is now moved by human hands, by small choices, repeated again and again, without spectacle. Some nights she dreamed, not of palaces or wedding days or gazes. She dreamed of the old hearth, of the cold stone floor of ash clinging to the hem of her skirt. In the dream, she was not afraid. She simply stood there, watching like someone looking at a room left behind long ago. When she woke, her heart beat slow and steady. She knew she still carried everything, and it no longer broke her. The king had died many years before her. He left gently like someone who had finished his work. Aschenputtel wore black long enough to reassure others, then returned to what needed doing. When night came, she allowed herself sorrow. Sorrow enough to remember, not so much as to drown. Old stories teach that grief too has its order. When old age became unmistakable, she asked to leave the palace. Not to flee, simply to return. She chose a quiet place, with trees, with earth, with familiar paths. She carried very little with her. What mattered most did not fit in a chest. It lived in memory, in how she set her feet upon the ground, in a breath that had learned to slow. On the day she chose to visit the hazel tree, the sky was neither beautiful nor ugly. It was simply sky. She walked slowly, stopping several times, not from weakness, but from wanting to look. This path had once been walked with tears. Now it was walked with calm. Not because the tears were gone, but because they had done their work. The hazel tree stood there larger than she remembered, its trunk thick, its roots sunk deep, its canopy shading a patch of ground long accustomed to waiting. Birds perched sparsely, not gathered. They looked at her as they had always looked, without greeting, without farewell, simply present. Aschenputtel sat beneath the tree. Her back rested against the rough wood, warm in its own way. She closed her eyes for a moment, not to ask. She needed nothing now, no dress, no slipper, no sudden light. Only a place quiet enough to breathe through an entire life. She spoke very softly, not to be heard, only so sound might exist. She spoke of children growing up a little safer, of women finding shelter when the world grew too heavy, of choices not perfect but honest. She did not speak of victory. She spoke of continuing. The wind stirred the leaves. The birds shifted their wings. The hazel tree did not answer. It was never said with words. It answered by standing firm, by offering shade without demand, by a presence without condition. That had always been the most reliable kind of magic. As the afternoon drifted into evening, Aschenputtel felt tired in a gentle way. Not the tiredness of fear, the tiredness of someone who had traveled far and was allowed to rest. She leaned more deeply into the trunk, letting her weight be held. Her breath slowed. Images passed without hurry. The hearth, cloth dresses, the sound of wings, a gaze that no longer bowed. She thought of legacy, not monuments, not songs. Legacy to her was doors opening a little more easily for those who came after. It was a girl somewhere, standing a little straighter because she knew someone had stood straight before her. Legacy did not need a name. It needed continuation. When night fully fell, passers-by saw nothing unusual. An elderly woman is sitting beneath a tree, still, quiet, as if resting. The birds did not scatter. They perched calmly. No need for warning. No need for protection. No one remained who had to be held back by beak and wing. The next morning they found her still there, eyes closed, face unstrained, one hand resting on cool earth. No sign of struggle, no haste. Just a life closing in the right place. The hazel tree stood. The birds lifted when needed. The story did not end. It shifted form, as all true stories do. People would retell it, smoothing its edges, adding a little light, but beneath the telling, the truth remained intact. That some people survive not because they are saved, but because they rise at the right moment. That magic does not heal, but it can open doors. That ancient justice does not comfort. It places things where they belong, and then it leaves. And if someone on a quiet night comes to the hazel tree, to sit, to breathe slowly, to speak honestly, they may not hear an answer, but the shade will still be there, as it was from the beginning, as it will remain. The circle closes, the hazel tree stands, the legacy continues, quietly, without permission, requiring only that those who come after have the courage to no longer bow. Now, you can let your breathing slow. If you are listening to this story at night, when the lights have been dimmed, when the room is reduced to blurred shapes and the distant sound of a clock, let your eyes close for a moment, not to sleep right away, just to be still, to stay with the afterimage, because this story does not truly end. It does not end when Aschenputtel closes her eyes beneath the hazel tree. It does not end when the birds leave, when the palace fades into memory, when names turn into legend. Stories like this do not shut themselves. They settle. They sink beneath the skin, waiting for the moment they touch a familiar pain and wake again. You might think this is an old story belonging to another age, to cold stone houses and ash-filled hearths. But if you listen closely, you will hear sounds more familiar than you expect. The silence of a father who turns away. The small but cutting laughter of those with power. The whisper that tells someone to endure one more day. There are still girls in the ash. Not real ash, but the ash of rooms where they are not seen. The ash of nameless, repeated labor. The ash of words that wear down the sense of having worth. They still wake before the light. They still lower their heads when entering crowded places. They still wait for a miracle, unsure whether it will ever come. This story does not promise that magic will save them. It never has. It whispers something else, instead smaller but truer. That some promises are kept even when the one who made them has gone very far. That some gazes do not require permission. That standing upright, even for a single moment, can change the course of an entire life. If this feels heavy, that is all right. Old stories were not born to lighten you. They were born to speak truth. And truth can be cold, dark, sometimes sharp as a bird's beak, in church light. But it is also the only thing that does not betray. Carry this story with you like a small stone in your pocket. Not to throw, not to display, just to feel its weight when you need to remember that you listened, that you understood, that you stayed until the end, that you are grown enough not to need the cleaned version, that you can remain in the dark without disappearing. And if on some night when sleep will not come, you hear a very quiet voice in your mind, not commanding, not comforting, just reminding you not to bow anymore. Remember that this voice does not come from magic. It comes from memory, from stories told, so the listener does not feel alone in their silence. Before we part for now, allow me one last ordinary whisper. If you wish to stay with stories like this, slow, dark, unapologetic, you can remain a little longer. Subscribe to the channel. Turn on the bell, not for noise, only so that when night falls and you need a voice that does not rush, it will be there. You do not need to listen right away. You do not need to listen to everything. These stories are patient. They wait. Now you can let sleep come. Carry with you the image of the hazel tree standing still in the dark. Carry the sound of birds that do not sing but still know. Carry the thought that somewhere someone once stepped into the light without bowing and that this was real. Sleep if you can, and if you cannot, that is all right too. The story is still here. It is not going anywhere.